Can you have a successful film career while living in the middle of nowhere? That is the question I want to tackle today. It has been almost 4 years since I moved from Los Angeles to rural Vermont. These have been the 4 most productive and profitable years in my 2 decades of filmmaking. And I wanted to make this video because for a long time I felt as though I couldn't succeed unless I was in New York, Los Angeles, or one of the other big film hubs, because that's where the jobs were, that's where the actors were, that's where the crew was. And I felt like I had to be there to be part of that. And I've actually found out that, for me at least, that is not true. In fact, the opposite is true. That being in those places was distracting and actually sidetracked me from doing the work that I wanted to do and make the films that I wanted to make and connect to the people that I wanted to connect with. I know there are a lot of other filmmakers out there, some of whom watch this channel and are wondering if they need to move. So I thought I would share my perspective and my experience of living in LA and New York versus living in the middle of nowhere in the country, where my closest neighbor is a 10-minute walk away. So how remote am I? I live in Colchester, Vermont. It is about a 25-minute drive to the city of Burlington, which is 30,000 people. It's about a 3.5-hour drive to Boston, and it's about a 5-6 hour drive to New York City. I haven't once regretted leaving Los Angeles for Vermont, but that may be a factor of what these last 3-4 years have been like since COVID, how work has changed, how travel has changed. That being said, this is the new reality, and people are not expecting you to be in LA and New York anymore. People are much more comfortable doing business with people they don't meet in person because they, a lot of the times, have moved away as well. I should also say that I still travel a lot for work. In the last year and a half, I've been to maybe a dozen cities. I've been to New York probably 15 times. 2 of those were driving, and the rest were taking the 45-minute flight from Burlington Airport. When I moved here, I thought I would do some extreme commuting, that I would wake up at 4 a.m., catch the 6 o'clock flight, have meetings and shoots in New York, and then come back on the 8 o'clock flight and be home at midnight. I actually haven't done that once. I find it easier to combine my work with other things that I want to do, catching up with friends or seeing things in the city. So I always stay at least one day. I also get that living in somewhere remote isn't for everyone. And had I not spent almost 10 years between New York and LA, I probably wouldn't have the contacts that I have that have allowed me to work remotely. Right now, I could live pretty much anywhere, but this is a good balance between being close enough to the jobs that I do need to travel to and being far enough away to enjoy a high quality standard of pretty low cost living and access to the natural world. I don't want to lie and say that everything is great here. There are a lot of drawbacks to living in a remote area as a filmmaker. Access to talent is the big one. If I would put up a casting notice in LA or New York, I would have hundreds of submissions. If I do the same in Vermont, I'll get maybe 2. I've tried to work around that by finding people on Instagram, joining local actors groups on Facebook, and also relying on other actors and models' connections. Because if they're in that world, they probably know other people that are as well. There isn't a ton of people to collaborate with here, but I felt like I have better collaborations with people in spaces like Vermont than I do in New York and LA. In New York and LA, there's so much going on. There's so many people. There's, if you meet someone who's a filmmaker, that's no big deal. It's not really the basis of a friendship or an ongoing connection, because LA and New York are full of filmmakers. When you meet another filmmaker in a place like Vermont, you tend to work together more and create more of a collaboration because they may be the only other person in 100 square miles that do what you do. You have to be a lot more conscientious in creating your networks and maintaining them. And that's probably why I've been able to do that better in Vermont than I was in LA. I also find that in big cities, people have their guards up more. They're less trusting. They're less open to working with other people. Whereas in the country, people tend to be a lot nicer, a lot more giving. The big advantages of being in nature every single day are, for me, it gives me much more time to be creative, to find inspiration, to walk in the woods in every season, to spend time outside, to live a rich and fulfilling life that then translates into better films. I feel more inspired, I feel more creative when I'm not in a tiny little apartment in a big city hustling to afford really expensive car insurance and overpriced groceries. It gives me more time to write, it gives less pressure, and it ultimately makes me happier, which makes me more creative. I get that this isn't for everyone. I grew up in a remote area. I'm much more at home and content in nature than I am in the city. Working as I work now in my 40s, where I'm largely in control of the work that I want to do, I'm creating my own films or I'm creating content for YouTube, I'm far less dependent on clients and that sort of thing than I was in my 20s and 30s. The punchline of this whole video is that the biggest advantage of being a creative professional and of working for yourself is to be able to set the parameters in which you want to work and then create the life that you want to live for yourself. If you're hustling like crazy and you're not happy living in a big city, being an independent filmmaker, you're much better off just getting a job. At least then you have some security and some predictability. For me, the whole point of living this life is living life on your terms, wherever and whenever you want to be, and creating films that mean something to you. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.